بدي احفظ الاطفال لهيدا والبده اياه.
وين هي الدولة اللبنانية ترد؟ وين هي؟
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri accuses Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah of replacing the entire Lebanese state with Hezbollah's Shura Council. Syrian regime forces bombard rebel positions in Damascus and its surroundings. And moderate cleric Hassan Rouhani takes a commanding lead in Iran's presidential elections based on the latest results. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri has snapped back at Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, accusing him of replacing the entire Lebanese state with Hezbollah's Shura Council. Shortly after Nasrallah's speech marking the Wounded Resistance Fighter Day, Hariri said the Hezbollah leader only acknowledged the authority of the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Sayyid Ali al-Khamenei. He added Nasrallah's claims that the future movement is sending fighters to Syria are fabricated and totally false. On Friday, Nasrallah said Hezbollah will stay involved in the Syrian conflict after having helped regime forces recapture the key town of Qusair from rebels. He noted that thousands of anti-regime fighters have come from all around the world to fight in Syria through money, weapons, and media. Lebanese President Michel Sleiman says the military must track down those responsible for firing rockets into Baalbek and put them on trial. Sleiman's remarks came during talks with visitors at his office in Babda Palace today. Sleiman added such acts of aggression are despicable and must be condemned and rejected outright. 2 people were wounded on Friday as 9 rockets fired from Syrian territory landed in Bekaa city of Baalbek, shortly after Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah vowed in a speech to put an end to rocket against the Hermel region. The national news agency says 4 more rockets hit the city, wounding 2 people. The agency said the rockets fell in the areas of Al-Kayal, Adus intersection, Al-Basatin, and near the My College School, the house of Sleiman Ramadan, and the house of Sheikh Hassan Shamaz. The Maronite Bishops' Council has voiced its concern with the ongoing crisis in Syria and the political deadlock in Lebanon. Following its annual retreat in Kirki, the council headed by Patriarch Bashar al-Ra'i has called on all sides to end the unrest in Syria. It also called for a return to dialogue in order for the Syrian people and those living in the region to live in peace. Moreover, the bishops condemned the kidnappings linked to the crisis, including the ongoing abduction of bishops Yohanna Ibrahim and Boulos Yazji. Addressing the situation in Lebanon, the bishops expressed their great concern over the political deadlock, particularly the politicians' failure to agree on a new parliamentary electoral law, the extension of Parliament's mandate, and the inability to stage the elections. Prime Minister-designate Tamam Salam has resumed consultations over the formation of his government. Salam held a series of talks with officials at his Msaitbe residence this morning, including with Health Minister Ali Hassan Khalil, Speaker Nabih Berri's political aide, and then later former Minister Tony Karam from the Lebanese forces. Sources say Salam was still for a 24-minister cabinet that will see an equal distribution of portfolios between the March 8, March 14, and centrists. Salam is also holding on to the principle of rotation of ministerial portfolios among the sects and parties and still opposes granting any party veto power. The sources said Salam had met earlier this week with MP Walid Jumblat and Social Minister Wael Abu Fahour to discuss the cabinet formation. Farmers and residents of Akkar in North Lebanon have briefly blocked the Abudiyya road leading to Syria. Around 40 protesters blocked the Abudiyya crossing in protest of repeated violations to their fields from across the border. The farmers complained of facing difficulties gaining access to their fields and collecting their harvest as a result of the clashes in Syria, which sometimes spilled over across the border. The violence in Syria has significantly impacted Lebanon's security. There is frequent shelling and rocket attacks from Syria into northern and eastern border areas. Syrian regime forces have bombarded rebel positions in Damascus and its surroundings with air raids and artillery fire. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says fighting was also reported on the outskirts of the Palestinian Yarmouk camp in southern Damascus, which also came under regime fire. Outside of the capital, regime troops fired mortar shells in several areas, including western Muaddamiyat al-Sham, southern Spain, and the region of Wadi Barada, northwest of Damascus. The observatory said the shelling caused injuries and damage. Elsewhere in the country, regime forces were shelling parts of the central Homs region, Aleppo in the north, and southern Daraa. The Syrian regime has pledged to launch an assault to retake the northern city of Aleppo and its surroundings, large swaths of which are still under rebel control. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon reiterates his concern over the escalating crisis in Syria, saying the international community needs to remain united to find a solution. Speaking to reporters at the UN headquarters in New York City, Ban said each day brings new depths of despair and sectarian polarization.
The validity of any information on the alleged use of chemical weapons cannot be ensured without convincing evidence of the chain of custody. The use of chemical weapons by any party would be a crime against humanity. Given the seriousness of the allegations and the potentially grave consequences, I again urge the Syrian government to grant Dr. Sellstrom's team the access we have long sought. There is no military solution to this conflict, even if both the government and the opposition and their supporters think there can be. The military path points directly towards the further disintegration of the country, destabilization of the region, and inflammation of religious and communal tensions.
The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, reiterates the U.S. intelligence community has high confidence that chemical weapons, including sarin gas, have been used by the Syrian government against the opposition. This claim has also been supported by British Prime Minister David Cameron.
In terms of Syria and chemical weapons, let me say this. I welcome the candid assessment from the Americans. It is consistent with what we've already said. There is credible evidence of multiple attacks using chemical weapons in Syria, including the use of the abhorrent agent sarin. We have tested physiological samples at Porton Down. These include samples from Uttabah on the 19th of March and from Sheikh Maqsood on the 13th of April. We believe that the scale of use is sanctioned and ordered by the Assad regime. We haven't seen any credible reporting of chemical weapons use by the Syrian opposition. However, we assess that elements affiliated to al-Qaeda in the region have attempted to acquire chemical weapons for probable use in Syria.
The White House says it does not want to send U.S. troops to Syria and says enforcing a no-fly zone over the country could require intense, open-ended U.S. military engagement. Western diplomats said the United States was considering a no-fly zone in Syria after the White House said Syria had crossed a red line by using nerve gas.
The use of chemical weapons violates clear international norms. For decades, the international community sought to strengthen a norm against the use of this type of weapon, given both its potential for mass casualty and given the type of weapon of mass destruction that it is and the effects we've seen it have when it's been used in past history. So this isn't just a red line for the United States in our view. It should be a red line for the international community generally. But we also look at the efficacy of a no-fly zone. And frankly, in Syria, when you have a situation where regime forces are intermingled with opposition forces, they're fighting in some instances block by block in cities, that's not a problem you can solve from the air. So I think people need to understand that the no-fly zone is not some type of silver bullet that is going to stop a very intense and in some respects sectarian conflict that is taking place on the ground. Differences with Russia on Syria, and all I'd say with respect to the chemical weapons assessment that we briefed to them is that we have a broad range of evidence associated with the multiple incidents of chemical weapons use that we assess took place. That includes open source reporting, it includes intelligence reporting, it includes the accounts of individuals. It also includes physiological samples of sarin that we've obtained from within Syria.
Russia says there is no need for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to use chemical weapons against the rebels because his forces are making steady advances on the ground. This is according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who's expressed his remarks during a joint press conference with his Italian counterpart Emma Bonino. Russia said on Friday it was unconvinced by U.S. allegations that Assad had used chemical weapons against his own people. U.S. President Barack Obama's administration said it will boost military support for the opposition as a result. On another note, Lavrov says the use of F-16 fighter jets, Patriot missiles from Jordan to enforce potential no-fly zone over Syria would be a violation of international law. Coming up next, inmates at a high-security prison in Peru attempt to break the world record for the number of people dancing in jail. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Turkish protesters have refused to vacate Istanbul's Gezi Park despite a concession by Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan to halt the site's redevelopment ahead of a court ruling. Today's decision could see police again intervene in what is already a major showdown between the protesters and the government. The decision comes a day after Erdogan met with the group along with artists and actors. The Turkish Prime Minister had accepted to delay the redevelopment of Gezi Park, pending a court decision on its legality. He also said a referendum will be held to determine the park's fate, even if the court ruled in the favor of redevelopment. Earlier today, Turkish President Abdullah Gül wrote on Twitter that everyone should now return home, insisting the channels for rediscussion and dialogue have opened. Moving on to Iran, moderate cleric Hassan Rouhani has taken a commanding lead in the country's presidential election based on the latest results, with about 30% of the total votes counted. The Interior Ministry says Rouhani, a former nuclear negotiator, leads with 51% of counted votes. He is followed by Tehran's Mayor Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf with 16.32% of the votes. Mohsen Rezai, a former head of the elite Revolutionary Guard, is now in third place, racing past Saeed Jalili, Iran's chief nuclear negotiator. Polling stations stay open for up to 5 hours after than planned, as millions of Iranians turned out to cast their votes. In an apparent attempt to signal political continuity, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said on Saturday that whatever the result of Friday's election, it would be a vote of the confidence in the 30-year-old republic. France has cleared the European Union to launch free trade talks with the United States after fellow EU members accepted its demand to shield movies and online entertainment from the might of Hollywood and Silicon Valley. After 12 hours of talks, EU officials announced that the 27 EU trade ministers had finally agreed a negotiating mandate towards what could be the world's most ambitious trade agreement. The breakthrough came only after the ministers telephoned their leaders, including French President François Hollande, British Prime Minister David Cameron, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Paris had refused to join the 26 other EU governments unless television, movies, and developing online media were left out. And now for news around the world in brief, inmates at a high-security prison in Peru put on their dancing shoes for a shot at breaking the world record for the number of people dancing in jail. An estimated 1,200 inmates at the overcrowded Lurigancho prison in Lima turned out their best Latin moves for the massive aerobics class as they moved to the beats of reggaeton and swayed to stylings of merengue. With many prisoners behind bars for drug and alcohol-related crime, dancing inmates say life in the prison has changed dramatically since aerobics was introduced to the maximum security jail. A blast near a women's university in Quetta has killed at least 11 female students and wounded dozens of people in Pakistan, with a second blast reported at the hospital where some of those injured were taken. Police and reports said the first explosion happened on a bus near the university campus, with a bomb hidden in the vehicle. The second blast struck the casualty ward of the Bolan Medical Complex, and fixing said it would be continuing in the aftermath. Codenamed Project Loon, Google has released helium-filled balloons into the sky in the heart of New Zealand's South Island as part of an experiment to get the planet online by beaming the internet down to Earth. The balloons carry antennae, computers, batteries, and navigational equipment, and scavenge power from solar panels that dangle below. The balloons fly twice as high as a commercial plane and are able to beam internet access to the ground below with similar speeds to most 3G networks. This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri accuses Hezbollah chief Said Hassan Nasrallah of replacing the entire Lebanese state with the Hezbollah's Shura Council. Syrian regime forces bombard rebel positions in Damascus and its surroundings. And finally, modern cleric Hassan Rouhani takes a commanding lead in Iran's presidential election based on the latest results. Those were your Saturday headlines from Future Television, live from Beirut. Catch us again tomorrow for more of the world's top stories. Have a great evening.
وين هي الدولة اللبنانية ترد؟ وين هي؟